Let's talk about the startup world. You know the image, right? The brilliant founder, the world-changing idea, and this incredible journey to fame and fortune. It's a dream that's been packaged and sold everywhere, from California all the way to Accra. And the gospel of this dream, the mantra everyone repeats, is fail fast, fail often. It sounds great, doesn't it? The idea is that every single failure is just a lesson learned, just one more stepping stone on your way to that big, game-changing success. You just have to keep pushing. But here's the question we need to ask. What if that's not how it works for everyone? What if failure isn't a stepping stone at all? What if, for a lot of people, this celebrated mantra is actually a trap that leads directly to ruin? Okay, let's really get into this. So it all starts with what we can call the Silicon Valley Playbook. And the promise is pretty straightforward. You keep trying, you keep launching businesses, you keep failing, and eventually one of them will hit and you'll have a massively profitable startup. This isn't just an idea anymore. It's been exported globally as the way to build a modern economy. Now, a huge part of this playbook is the belief that quitting is the absolute worst thing you can do. The grind, the hustle, the sleepless nights, all of it gets glorified. It's seen as this noble sacrifice you have to make to win the big prize. But what often gets left out of the story are the very real long-term costs of that grind. So what happens when you take this playbook and drop it into a totally different cultural and economic setting? Well, to figure that out, a researcher named Dr. Tessa Pijnaker spent a full year, 12 months, inside Ghana's tech hubs. She wanted to see what the real-world impact of this imported dream looked like on the ground. And, well, the story she uncovered is very different. Honestly, what Dr. Pijnaker's research found is pretty startling. For so many young entrepreneurs in Ghana who were following this model to the letter, it didn't lead to some big success story. No, instead, it lured them into a kind of trap, a slow downward spiral that left them poorer and more alone than when they started. And when you put the promise side by side with the reality, the contrast is just stark. The promise says failure is just a lesson. The reality for them? It was often complete financial ruin. The promise says the hardship is temporary. For them, it became a long-term, grinding way of life. And that dream of fame and fortune, it was replaced by the harsh reality of being isolated and insecure. And let's be real, all of this is happening against a backdrop we all know. That brutal statistic that something like 90% of all startups fail. That's true pretty much everywhere, but what this research shows is that the cost of that failure, what you actually lose, is not the same for everyone. And that brings us to the real price of just keeping going. The human cost of chasing that startup dream, especially when the cultural and financial safety nets you'd expect just aren't there to catch you. This quote from an entrepreneur in the study just hits the nail on the head. It really gets to the core of this cultural clash. There's this traditional idea that you get one shot, one clear path to a good, stable life. So when you decide to become an entrepreneur, your family isn't just excited, they're worried. You're gambling away your only real chance. And this is what that traditional path looks like. It's a clear, predictable ladder to stability. You go to school, you go to university, you get a good, secure job, and then you build a life. You buy a car, a house, you get married. So when someone steps off that ladder to chase the startup dream, the stakes are unbelievably high. And these are the words of that very same entrepreneur, but years later. His family had supported him through multiple failed startups, but he kept going, even moving away to keep trying. And this was the result. This wasn't a valuable lesson. This was struggling to find food. This was feeling so ashamed you can't ask for help. This was being completely and utterly alone. And here is the absolute core of the trap. After they've spent years grinding it out in the startup world, they often become basically unemployable in the traditional job market. Recruiters don't look at their resumes and see valuable lessons learned from failure. They just see a huge, unexplained gap. So they're stuck. They can't find success in the startup world, but they can't get out of it either. And the cost? It's so much more than just financial. The research shows this relentless chase fractures the absolute foundations of a person's life. It wrecks the relationships, their ability to build a family, and their place in their own community. I mean, listen to these words from a female entrepreneur. By a lot of standards, she was a success. She'd even raised almost $100,000 for her company. But when it eventually failed, she found herself in her early 30s, single, without children, and with this crushing fear of being skipped, of being left behind by life itself.
For a lot of the male entrepreneurs, the story was tragically similar. Their constant financial instability meant they just couldn't afford the important cultural steps to get married, like paying the bride price. Meanwhile, their partners, who were often in their early 30s, were ready to start a family. The pressure would build and build until something broke. And in the end, it was often both the startup and the romantic relationship that collapsed at the same time.
So you have to wonder, right? If the consequences are this devastating, why don't we hear about it more? Why do these stories of deep hardship stay hidden behind the shiny, exciting image of the startup scene? Well, it turns out there are these incredibly powerful forces that basically demand silence. On one hand, you've got real economic fears. If you speak out, you might scare away new talent, or even worse, the foreign investment the whole ecosystem depends on. But then you have these deep social pressures too, the fear of bringing shame to your family, or of feeding into tired negative stereotypes about Africa. The result is this bubble of silence, where the community feels forced to frame every failure as just a lesson, never the disaster it can actually be.
And inside that bubble of silence, the fallout is just catastrophic. The research shows how this immense, unending pressure leads to chronic illnesses brought on by stress, to crushing social isolation, and, in the most tragic cases, to suicidal thoughts and even actions.
Which, of course, leads us to the biggest, most important question of all. After years of this kind of financial decline, social isolation, and deep psychological damage, is it even possible to truly recover?
And the answer that Dr. Pijnaker gives, based on her research, isn't a simple one. It's a complicated yes and no. Yes, recovery is possible, but it's often incomplete. Some of the wounds can heal, but the scars, the ripple effects, those can last a lifetime.
So here's what that yes and no actually looks like. The yes part is that, thankfully, most do eventually find a job and they manage to repair those strained family bonds. But the no part is heavy. Many are just never able to financially catch up to their friends. They can't afford the house or the car. They find themselves approaching their late 30s, unmarried, without the children they might have wanted. And for some, the physical toll is permanent. They're left with chronic illnesses caused by years of intense stress.
And that leaves us with a final really big thought. When a global economic model that we celebrate, that we hold up as the ideal path to success, causes this much quiet harm to so many people, what does that say about how we define success in the first place? And maybe more importantly, what does it say about who is really paying the price for that definition?